It was called the most innovative company in America, until it lost $74 billion and became the face of corporate fraud. Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, where we uncover the true stories behind the biggest mysteries, scandals, and events that shaped our world. Today, we're diving into a corporate disaster that shocked the globe, the Enron scandal. Once praised as the most innovative company in America, Enron seemed unstoppable. But behind the scenes, a web of lies and greed was quietly unraveling, leading to one of the largest financial collapses in history. Stay tuned as we uncover how Enron lost $74 billion, betrayed thousands, and changed corporate America forever. The rise of Enron, the American dream. In the heart of Houston, Texas, amid the roaring oil economy of the 1980s, a company emerged that promised to reshape the energy industry. It was called Enron. Founded in 1985 through the merger of two regional pipeline companies, Enron was, at first glance, just another utility. But its ambitions ran far deeper. At the helm stood Kenneth Lay, a former government official with a genial smile and an Ivy League pedigree. Lay dreamed not just of selling energy, but of turning energy itself into a commodity that could be bought and sold like gold. Lay's charisma and vision quickly attracted talent. Among them was Jeffrey Skilling, a sharp, aggressive consultant from McKinsey & Company, who joined Enron in the early 1990s. Skilling didn't just want to reform Enron, he wanted to reinvent it. He introduced an audacious idea, mark-to-market accounting, a method that would allow Enron to book profits on long-term energy contracts the day they were signed, even if the money wouldn't come in for years. With Skilling's innovations and Lay's connections, Enron transformed rapidly. The company shed its image as a pipeline operator and rebranded itself as a tech-driven energy trader, a Wall Street darling. Enron Online, a web-based trading platform, was hailed as revolutionary. Its stock price soared. Media outlets gushed over Enron's boldness. It was named America's most innovative company by Fortune 6 years in a row. But innovation came with a cost. To sustain the illusion of unstoppable growth, Enron needed ever-rising profits. Enter Andrew Fastow, the company's young and ambitious chief financial officer. Fastow devised elaborate financial structures that buried Enron's mounting debt. To the public, the company looked lean, agile, and endlessly profitable. Internally, however, it was more fragile than anyone dared admit. As Enron stock surged past $90, employees poured their retirement savings into company shares. Analysts blindly praised its complex business model without fully understanding it. Lay, Skilling, and Fastow became Wall Street royalty, celebrated for outsmarting the old rules of business. But underneath the triumph, a dangerous question loomed. What happened when Enron ran out of real profits to report? That question, unspoken, unanswered, haunted the company's foundations. Behind the closed doors of executive meetings, strategies were no longer about innovation but about concealment. Numbers were manipulated, debts hidden, and projections crafted like fiction. Still, the world outside remained dazzled. Enron wasn't just a company, it was a symbol of American ingenuity and ambition. Its meteoric rise seemed unstoppable, a fairy tale of capitalism at its finest. Yet, every fairy tale has a darker side. And as Enron climbed higher, so too did the stakes. What no one outside the boardroom could see was that the very brilliance fueling its ascent might soon become the fire that consumed it. The illusion was perfect, until it wasn't. Behind the curtain, greed, deception, and fake numbers. By the late 1990s, Enron was no longer just a company, it was a phenomenon. The press hailed it as a titan of innovation. Its headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Houston, seemed to reach for the very future Enron claimed to be building. But inside that tower, the mood was far from secure. Behind the congratulatory headlines and soaring stock prices lay a truth far more sinister. Enron was not making real money, it was faking it. It began with mark-to-market accounting, the method Skilling championed. In theory, it allowed Enron to estimate the future value of deals and record that as present revenue. In practice, it meant Enron could fabricate profits on contracts that might never pay off. A 20-year deal with uncertain returns became instant income on a balance sheet. It was legal, but dangerously misleading. When profits didn't materialize, Andrew Fastow stepped in with a solution: special purpose entities, or SPEs. These were shell companies created to keep Enron's mounting debt off the books. Fastow controlled these entities himself, naming them with cryptic initials, LJM1, LJM2, as if to cloak them in complexity. Through these deals, Enron sold assets to its own shadow firms, masking losses and boosting revenue. The system worked, but only for a while. Internally, a culture of fear took root. Employees who questioned the numbers were silenced or pushed out. Promotions favored loyalty over honesty. Whistleblowers were ignored, and transparency was a threat, not a virtue. People understood, if you wanted to stay at Enron, you didn't ask questions. You played along. On the outside, investors and analysts remained enchanted. Quarterly reports showed consistent growth. Enron's stock continued to rise. The financial world, seduced by complexity, refused to look closely. When concerns did arise, executives responded with confidence and misdirection. Jeffrey Skilling, the architect of Enron's new model, dismissed critics as naive. He famously insulted a skeptical analyst during a conference call, calling him an A**hole for merely asking how Enron made its money. That moment should have sparked alarm. Instead, it became a symbol of the company's arrogance and Wall Street's complicity. Meanwhile, employees were encouraged to pour their savings into Enron stock. The more they invested, the more they believed in the illusion. After all, their leaders were national icons. Kenneth Lay was friendly with presidents. Skilling was hailed as a genius. Fastow was winning awards for financial innovation. But behind closed doors, even they knew the walls were cracking. The debts were growing too large. The lies too intricate. The schemes too reckless. They had built a company on fiction. And it could only stay afloat if no one asked the wrong question, if the markets kept believing, and if the truth stayed buried. But truth has a way of finding light. And for Enron, the moment of exposure was no longer a matter of if, only when. The collapse. The moment everything fell apart. In October 2001, Enron's carefully constructed facade began to crack. The first fissure came quietly, an earnings report. The company, for the first time in years, revealed a $618 million third-quarter loss. Even more startling was the announcement that $1.2 billion in shareholder equity had mysteriously vanished, attributed vaguely to related party transactions. Wall Street was stunned. But those who understood Enron's tangled web of shadow deals knew the truth. The empire was starting to unravel. Journalists and analysts, long distracted by Enron's complexity, now began to ask the very questions the company had worked so hard to avoid. What were these related party entities? Why was so much debt hidden off the balance sheet? And why was Chief Financial Officer Andrew Fastow, a company executive, managing many of these secret firms? The answer was devastating. Fastow had not only orchestrated the creation of Enron's special-purpose entities, but had also personally profited from them, earning tens of millions in the process. These entities, it turned out, were absorbing Enron's toxic assets and debts, allowing the company to report inflated earnings while Fastow reaped the rewards behind the scenes. The press pounced. Shareholders panicked. Enron's once mighty stock began a freefall, collapsing from over $90 to less than $10 in just a few weeks. Confidence vanished almost overnight. By November, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission had launched a formal investigation. The truth, buried for so long under complex accounting and corporate swagger, was beginning to surface. Jeffrey Skilling, the supposed mastermind of Enron's transformation, had mysteriously resigned just weeks earlier, citing personal reasons. Many now saw it as a calculated exit, an escape before the crash. Meanwhile, Kenneth Lay, who had returned as CEO, scrambled to calm investors and the public, even as he sold off millions in stock himself. Inside the company, fear and confusion spread. Thousands of employees, many of whom had their retirement savings tied up in Enron stock, watched helplessly as their life savings vanished. The 401k accounts were frozen, and employees were barred from selling, even as executives dumped their own shares. Then came the internal alarm bell. Sharon Watkins, a vice president at Enron, wrote an anonymous memo to Kenneth Lay, warning him that the company was about to implode in a wave of accounting scandals. Her warnings, though courageous, came too late. On December 2, 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy, the largest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history at the time. Over 20,000 employees lost their jobs, billions in shareholder value was wiped out, and the ripple effects spread across global markets. The fall was swift, brutal, and complete. The company that had once promised to light the future had burned itself to the ground, consumed by greed, deceit, and the belief that the truth could be forever buried beneath complex numbers. But now, the world was watching. And the reckoning had just begun. Aftermath, justice, lessons, and legacy. When the dust settled, Enron was gone, but its impact had only begun. The company's collapse didn't just devastate shareholders and employees, it shattered trust in corporate America. Public outrage surged. Millions demanded accountability. And for the key players, the reckoning was both personal and public. Kenneth Lay, Enron's founder, was indicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. He maintained his innocence, portraying himself as a victim of deception rather than a perpetrator. But in 2006, just weeks before his sentencing, Lay suffered a fatal heart attack. He died never serving a day in prison. Jeffrey Skilling, once hailed as a financial visionary, faced a much harsher fate. He was convicted on 19 counts, including fraud, insider trading, and conspiracy. In court, Skilling showed little remorse, insisting the company had simply failed. He was sentenced to 24 years in federal prison, one of the longest white-collar sentences in history. Years later, after multiple appeals and a reduced sentence, he was released in 2019, but the stain on his name never faded. Andrew Fastow, the architect of Enron's financial deception, struck a plea deal. He admitted to pocketing over $30 million in secret profits and manipulating Enron's books. In exchange for his testimony against Skilling and Lay, he served 5 years in prison. Upon release, Fastow became a cautionary speaker, talking about ethics, irony clinging to every word. The human toll was staggering. Over 20,000 employees lost not just jobs, but retirement savings, pensions, and health care. Many had invested their futures in Enron stock, encouraged by leadership to trust the company's long-term vision. That trust was betrayed. Families were uprooted. Lives were altered forever. In the aftermath, lawmakers moved quickly. In 2002, the U.S. Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, a sweeping piece of legislation aimed at preventing future corporate fraud. It required greater financial transparency, stricter auditing procedures, and imposed heavy penalties on executives who signed off on false financial statements. The act was a direct response to Enron, and its name became synonymous with accountability in the boardroom. Enron's downfall also claimed other casualties. The Arthur Andersen accounting firm, one of the Big Five auditors, was convicted of obstruction of justice for shredding Enron-related documents. The conviction was later overturned, but the damage was irreversible. The firm collapsed, and tens of thousands of employees lost their jobs, guilt by association. Today, Enron is taught in business schools as the ultimate example of corporate failure, not just in strategy, but in ethics. It's a story about what happens when ambition loses its anchor in truth, when innovation becomes a mask for fraud, and when leadership forgets its duty to the people behind the numbers. The Enron scandal wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a series of choices, made by men who believed they were too smart to get caught. But they were caught. And in their fall, the world learned a costly lesson. Trust is built slowly, lost quickly, and once gone, leaves ruins in its place.